Սիրելի բարեկամներ, շարունակում ենք մեր հաղորդումը ձեզ ներկայացնելով հայ բարեգործական ընդհանուր միության հանդիսասրահում տեղի ունեցած հանդիպման մասին մեր պատրաստած ակնարկը, պատմող Ներսի Գրիգորյանի «Որքան որ լույս կար» գրքի մասին, եւ նաեւ ձեզ ներկայացնելով մեր արած հարցազրույցը հեղինակի հետ։
The young professionals of Greater New York joined with AGBU University Outreach and AGBU New York Special Events Committee hosted a book reading and signing event with author Nancy Kricorian on her new novel, All the Light There Was. Nancy Kricorian is a novelist, essayist, and activist. She grew up in the Armenian community of Watertown, Massachusetts, and has degrees from Dartmouth College and Columbia University. Her poetry and essays have been published in numerous literary journals and magazines. Her previous novels included Zabel, 1998, and Dreams of Bread and Fire, 2003. She has been part of the national staff of Code Pink Women for Peace since 2003 and has served on the executive committee of the Armenia Tree Project since 2001. In a lively and interactive presentation, Nancy Kricorian spoke about the process of writing the novel, accompanied by a slideshow of people she met and places she had visited while she had researched for the book. She also entertained the audience by reading an excerpt from her novel. During the Q&A with the audience, Nancy Kricorian answered a wide variety of questions about the novel as well as her life and career. The evening concluded with Nancy Kricorian signing copies of her novel for the members of the audience.
Nancy, thank you so much for this interview and congratulations on this wonderful book. So it tells a story of an Armenian family in Paris during Nazi occupation in 1940s. Yes. That alone, that subject alone is already quite intriguing because obviously we have a long history of prosecution, of genocide, and now we have an Armenian family facing a German occupation and trying to cope with it. Why did you write this story?
I was doing research for my second novel, which had a character in it who was a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary with a bomb. So I started doing a lot of research about groups that used political violence. So I was looking at everything from the Symbionese Liberation Army to the Red Army Brigade to the French Resistance. And when I was doing the research on the French Resistance, I came across a 1984 French documentary called Terrorists in Retirement that was about a resistance network that was made up of communist immigrant workers. And it was led by an Armenian named Misak Manushian. And this was the first time I had heard of this, and it was 10 years ago I started working on this. And so I did a lot of research, and I started thinking, what would it have been like for these Armenians who had survived the genocide, who came to France and rebuilt their communities, and then all of a sudden the Nazis marched, down the Rue de Belleville, which is the neighborhood that I have it take place in Belleville. And what would this have felt like to them after having, had this trauma behind them, and then a new trauma just happening?
In one of your previous interviews, you compared it to releasing a novel to sending your kid to a kindergarten. Right. Now that your child is out in the world, how is it playing out?
Well, let's put it, it's only been out, my child has only been out in the world for 2 weeks, so the jury's still out. The first reviews are just coming in, and the response from, being on my book tour, people have been coming out to the tour, and some people have read the book and starting to do customer comments on Amazon and reader ratings on Goodreads and so on, and it seems pretty favorable so far. Of course, when you're a writer, you want everyone to just have undying love for it and have not one critical thing to say, but that doesn't happen.
Every time I have an opportunity to speak with an author or an artist in person, I always want to take advantage and ask about the creative process. How long it took for you to write this book?
This book took a very long time, and part of it had to do with having to do so much research, because my previous 2 books, I had more material from my own family story that I could use in both of them, whereas in this one it was totally from scratch. No one in my family had been, in Paris during the occupation. I had to, do all this research and oral history interviews and all this. And then the other reason it took a really long time was because I was very involved in the anti-war movement, working full-time for a women's peace group. Plus my kids were growing from age 7 and 11 to 17 and 21. And oddly, it was easier to write when they were smaller because they didn't take up as much room in my head. but when they're older, they require more thinking somehow. So it took 10 years to do this.
You were born in Massachusetts?
I was born, yes. I grew up in Watertown, Massachusetts.
In Watertown, Massachusetts, where there's obviously a very robust and one of the most established Armenian communities. And you also lived and studied in Paris.
Yes.
How much of this, well, I wouldn't call it autobiographical, but how much of it was influenced by living in Paris, by being there?
I know there are writers who can do this, who could write a novel that's like about ancient Greece without having ever been there, but that's very difficult for me. I really feel like I need to see the place and walk the streets and know the neighborhoods and make a map in my head of the neighborhoods. So having lived there, I felt like I knew my way around very well. It feels like a comfortable place to me. And then I went back several times while I was working on the book. At one point I realized, oh, she has to go to high school, lycée. And I had to decide which lycée it was. And then I went and took a tour of the building so that I could actually know what the building looked like in the courtyard and the doorway and everything. So when I was describing it, I could see it, and I had seen it.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your activist work, because you have been involved in an anti-war movement, if I'm not mistaken, Code Pink. Code Pink, yes, correct. First, tell me a little bit about your involvement. What is your purpose? What is your goal?
The Code Pink initially started, it was called a women's preemptive strike for peace, and it started in late 2002. And the idea was to prevent a war with Iraq, but clearly we were unsuccessful at that. And so then we spent the next, 10 years doing things like amplifying women's voices from Iraq. We brought some Iraqi women over and put them on tour through the country. We actually worked with Malalai Joya from Afghanistan to bring her to this country and have her go around and talk to communities so that people will have an understanding of what the impact of war is on people's lives and specifically on women's lives. So that's a lot of what we've been doing.
Being someone who is involved in, not necessarily in politics, but in sort of sense of justice, a sense of advancing a cause. Are you involved in any shape or form in a movement of recognition of Armenian genocide? And B, are you optimistic we will get our justice?
Wow, that's a very tough question. I mean, I feel like I do a lot of the work that I do, with Code Pink, and is about making sure that people's voices are heard and that the truth is known and that there is justice and that there is accountability, for all kinds of state violence. And I think that I'm not sort of actively involved in lobbying on this issue, but I feel part of the community and I feel like I raise my voice, when I can. In terms of optimism, I don't know. I feel like, you watch what's happening in the papers all the time, and it's like Turkey, Israel, U.S., geopolitics, and the Armenians and the Kurds and the Palestinians are often just sort of geopolitical footballs that get kicked back and forth. So I'm not super optimistic, but I think it's important that we continue struggling. We didn't stop the Iraq war, but you just keep working. You just keep working.
As a writer, what would you like the readers to take away from this book when they're done reading it?
I think that what I was trying to get at in this book was sort of about the enormous resiliency of the Armenian people. And that's what it is, that it's not always just stories about sort of calamity. It's not just the genocide. I mean, there's calamity after calamity. But what I'm really fascinated by is the enormous, resilience of the Armenians who, like a bird that its nest gets knocked down, just keeps rebuilding and rebuilding. The storm blows the nest down and they build a new nest. And that's the message, I think, that I was trying to get.
Have you been in Armenia?
Yes, I've been to Yerevan twice.
When was the last time you've traveled?
It was a while ago. I think it was 2007. I went in 2001 and 2007. The reason I was there is because I'm on the board of the Armenia Tree Project, and we do tree plantings and reforestation and sort of community development projects, and I have to say I love that work, and it's so hopeful and positive to have gone and see the trees that we planted and then go back 6 years later and see or 7 years later and see how big they are and how beautiful they are.
My question was actually precisely pointed in a direction, because during the dark years, all the trees were gone, and I was in Armenia and I've witnessed that.
Yes, they cut down the entire botanic garden.
Botanic garden, a monument, the entire park was gone, and the city trees. I grew up in Yerevan, and my childhood memories is greenery, trees everywhere, so this was a devastating picture. And as an activist, you supported this unique project, in essence, of replanting the trees.
Yes.
Nancy, thank you so much for this interview. Okay. Just to our audience, All the Light There Was, definitely available on Amazon. It's available everywhere, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Google, your local bookseller. Buy it, read it. It's a fantastic read. Thank you so much.